In a dark room, a man holds a Go piece while analyzing the board. With a crisp sound, he then places the white piece among the others. Meanwhile, a man in dark sunglasses watches the game with a serious expression. The man then calmly makes another move on the board. He comments that he's seeing a move that simply can't be explained. Suddenly, his hand trembles over the board as he notices something very strange. Angrily, he shouts that there's a move there that should never exist. At that moment, a badly bruised young man appears with a very unsettling smile on his face. It's soon revealed that everything was completely wrong from the very beginning. Then the story takes us 10 years into the past, to where it all began. We are introduced to Won Do-yun, a little boy just 9 years old. The boy lived in the poorest neighborhood of the district, a very rundown place. By his side is his 8-year-old sister Won I-yun, and he took care of her all by himself. Out of nowhere, a soccer ball flies at high speed toward the two of them. Some boys shout not to let protagonist get the ball under any circumstances. One of them says he needs to at least grab his clothes to stop him, but the boy is fast and keeps running, not caring about the others. The ball goes straight for the goal, but Do-yun deflects it, and it hits the wall hard. Seeing this, a brown-haired boy yells, very irritated with the goalie. The ball then bounces hard off the wall and returns to the middle of the field. He was considered the weakest of all in that grim place. Being the weakest in a world completely dominated by conflict, the boys decide to stop, and one of them says that Do-yun's parents must be looking for him. The boy then says he's done playing with them and asks not to be bothered anymore. He places his foot on the ball, and one of them calls him a punk. An older man appears and says the boy no longer has that childish charm. This guy kicks the ball in his direction and invites him to come along. The ball stops near the boy's feet, but he refuses the man's invitation. The young man explains that he can't afford to take on any more debt, but the man smiles and says that Do-yun only hears what he wants to, and he has a job for him. The boy stands with his back turned, still a bit wary of the offer he received. Turning his face slightly, he then asks where they are going now. The man replies that it's his warehouse, while his little sister watches everything from the stairs. With a smirk, the guy explains that it's a house with nothing inside. Kim Moo-won really didn't seem to belong in that poor, worn-out neighborhood. Inside, the man tells them to sit anywhere, as he doesn't care. He comments that dragging 2 kids around has made him hungry, but Do-yun just wants the job. Then, he eats some uncooked ramen, and says that he's actually the one who's hungry. The man then throws several packages on the table, and tells the boy to sort the clothes. The protagonist remains silent for a moment, just analyzing the situation. Seeing his reaction, the man says there's more stuff than last time. The guy then agrees to pay more, and calls the young man a demanding brat. When his sister tries to help, Do-yun stops her, saying that this job is his alone. The boy then asks if the job is over as soon as he finishes sorting. However, the man says no and appears with a hot pot, calling them to eat. He places the food on the table and explains that the meal is also part of the job. In a serious tone, the guy states that they shouldn't eat alone. Surprised, the boy asks to have the cost of the food deducted from his payment. The man places a hand on his head and comments on how he dares to say such a thing. Afterward, he asks the boy to check the Dongzon route on the way back. While the siblings eat, the man grumbles that their life is all about work. He also advises the boy not to take sports too seriously. The 3 of them eat together while the man watches the young boy, deep in thought. The man wonders how that boy plans to grow up acting that way. It's revealed that things have always been this way, and we see Do-yun training with someone. This guy was Chu Dong-seon, a former MMA fighter and Moo-won's right-hand man. Their group was called the Gu Nilpa, and was based in that district. But they were a bit different from the other gangs in the region. With his eyes shining, the boy prepares to deliver a powerful strike. And with all his might, the little one lands a direct hit on his trainer's mitt. The trainer smiles proudly, seeing the boy's dedication in the daily training sessions. After practice, he hands the young man 2 eggs, so he can recover. With teary eyes, the boy thanks his master for the kind gesture. The routine was tough, and he worked very hard under the man's watchful eye. Even completely exhausted and sweating, the boy never thought about giving up. And so, he learned to fight to be able to defend himself and survive in that place. Besides training, he also worked as a newspaper delivery boy to get by. Even with the tiring routine, the boy still found time to study. All the money he earned was carefully saved in a bottle. Over time, the bottle filled up with his hard-earned savings, and it was with them that the protagonist learned his first lesson about endurance. He learned to bear the full weight of life, even at such a young age. His days at school weren't easy, and he always walked alone there. The boy thinks that if his parents were around, he wouldn't have gone through so much. After class, he sighs and prepares for another day of hard training. Around that time, the young man started playing soccer and found some joy. It was at that moment that he finally felt something called hope. But one day, the coach called him over, and the day he had been dreading finally arrived. With a worried expression, the boy turns to face what's coming. The coach asks what's going on and says his body seems heavy. Then, the man informs him that he's thinking of benching him for the next game. The boy silently agrees, already expecting this bad news from the coach. He confirms that he feels heavy, but the reason wasn't what the man thought. The truth is, the weight wasn't in his body, but in his back pocket. In a way, that worked, and he heads toward the locker room alone. He thought that sports would be a fair and completely clean place, but he realized it was no different there, and now he could leave without regrets. At that moment, some teammates approach and insult him badly. They keep taunting him and laughing about the fact that the young man didn't have parents. The bully says he's completely clueless and that he came to teach him a lesson. With a mocking smile, the bully says he's a really nice guy for teaching him. He reveals that the truth is Yun doesn't play because he's an orphan and has no money. The boy points to the field and says that out of the 22 players, he was the only one who didn't pay. With a serious look, the protagonist just thanks him for the information he received. Without another word, he turns and unlocks the locker room door with his key. The bully is surprised by the boy's calmness and grumbles, very annoyed, but Yun completely ignores him and enters the room without even looking back. Suddenly, the other boy flicks him on the head to get his attention. Angrily, he shouts that the way the protagonist acts is completely disgusting. Then the bully grabs him by the shirt and shouts that even with money, he would never play. He calls him a parasite and says that as long as he's around, nothing will be allowed. Next, he points at the young man and says that the way he lives is the reason. The boy grabs him by the back of the neck and shouts that's why he ended up without parents. Seeing the protagonist's silence, the bully asks if he's just trying to take it. Without a second thought, he lands a hard kick on the boy, who hits the wall. But Yoon gets up and says he already understood what he was trying to say. With his eyes gleaming, he reveals that the problem is the other guy thinking he's special because of his dad. And then, without hesitation, the protagonist lands a powerful punch on the bully's face. The boy's face is completely messed up after taking the hit. Lying on the floor, the bully hears the protagonist tell him to keep talking nonsense. That way, he says, he'll feel less guilty about what he's about to do. And without mercy, he starts to go after the boy who is on the ground, not fighting back. He grabs a soccer ball and kicks it with all his strength. The ball strikes the bully square in the head, sending him flying from the intense impact. The force is so great that the boy's head even dents the metal goalpost. From a distance, the coach and another person watch the whole scene with a smile, but in reality, the coach was screaming in desperation at what he had just seen. With a cold stare, the protagonist warns that he's done with him as of today. A few days after the incident, a meeting takes place in the principal's office. The reason for the meeting was precisely the intense incident that occurred between the students. The school principal announces that the protagonist has already received a severe punishment and will now also be expelled from the school. The young man defends himself, saying they started the trouble and came at him first, which is why he fought back. He then questions if he's being punished for not having parents, money, or anyone to protect him. With a furious look, the boy asks if the punishment is because the others are from Young. The principal remains completely silent, having no answer to give the boy. With a smirk, the protagonist says the school taught him something very useful. He turns and tells the principal to keep living that way, without a care in the world. It's revealed that for a long time, the world has been run by gangsters. These groups started collecting taxes, claiming they were protecting the residents. From this, large organizations like Young were born and spread a dark kind of peace. The boy then cries out of anger and frustration at the injustice he has just suffered, but he quickly wipes away his tears, trying to stay strong despite everything. The sun sets on the horizon, and night begins to fall over the poor neighborhood. With a clenched fist, he thinks that the reason for everything being this way, sir, is because the world is a harsh place, completely dominated by the strongest. He understands that everything was wrong from the beginning, and that nothing would be fair for him. The boy then stops in front of an old door with some strange stains on it. He remembers that from the big syndicates to the local thugs, they are all the same. To settle this old score, he needs to turn the tables as he had planned. The young man decides to use the same law of power that they used against him. Upon seeing him, Mu-won greets him and asks what happened to his eyes. All the members of the Gunilpa look at the boy with curiosity and surprise. Without a word, the protagonist throws his heavy backpack on the floor with a loud thud. He shows the contents and says that in there is everything he owns, and double the amount of the debt. The boss is surprised and says that he never actually lent the boy any money. The young man explains that he added up everything the man did for him, like food and work. Annoyed, the guy says he doesn't need that money and tells him to get out of there. But the boy insists and asks him to accept it, as it's his final settlement with the past. The man says he's being nice, but the boy needs to listen if he wants to stay there. Yun then approaches and says that he really has something important to say. With a serious look, the boss listens attentively to the boy's proposal before him. The young man then bows as a sign of respect and asks to be accepted as his son. He promises that in return, he will give the man something he always wanted but never got. Everyone in the room falls silent, just watching the completely unexpected scene. The gang's boss stares at him with a calculating and curious gaze. He comments that he wondered what the boy would become, but only his body has changed. The man then asks if the young man really thinks he knows what he wants. Without hesitation, the boy answers that what he desires most is the position of boss. With his eyes shining, he promises that next time, he will bring that position to him. The protagonist states that he has never broken a promise, unlike the old man there. Annoyed, the man complains that he just showed up out of nowhere, saying absurd things. He then asks why the boy came, if he already knew the answer would be no. But the young man points his finger and replies with confidence that this will work. Confused, the gang boss asks why him, of all people. The boy replies that no one but him could handle someone like him. Furthermore, he claims that the man is the only one capable of taking down Young. The Gunilpa's boss questions what he's basing such a statement on. With a smirk, the protagonist reveals that he saw them fight once. It happened not long after he first arrived in the district. He sighs and admits that he doesn't know the reason for that fight he witnessed, but he remembers that 5 people approached them with bad intentions. Actually, it was just 2 people who faced a crowd of enemies. A horde of thugs surrounded the 2 men, who prepared to fight. Then a fierce fight began, and the 2 faced their enemies without fear. The fight was intense, and the blows were delivered with great force and ferocity. The 2 fought bravely against the larger group that attacked them relentlessly. The intensity of that night was something the young man had never seen before. All kinds of weapons were used in that rough, no-rules battle. Cries of pain echoed through the dark alley as the fight continued. Yun comments that they didn't give their enemies a chance to get away from that place. Hidden, the boy and his sister watch the scene with eyes wide with fear. He thinks that he could never forget what he saw right in front of him that night. The image of the two men standing with their backs to him was forever etched in his memory. In the present, one of the men wonders if something like that really happened in the past. We are then introduced to the two fighters from that night bang, Jiu and Chudong-san. One of them explains that the boy is referring to when they were demoted. The gang boss understands and says that's more than enough of an explanation. The boy turns to leave while the man says that he has heard enough. Already at the door, he warns that they can no longer stop what is about to happen. Then he turns the doorknob and leaves the room, determined to follow through with his plan. The other members ask what the boss will do, and he says there's no other option. One of them comments that the boy is no good and that they can't handle this. The boss leans back and his colleague says it's been a while since they've disagreed. Lying on the sofa, the man says that no organization could handle that. He laments that the boy couldn't manage to wait just 2 more years. He then thinks that he treated the boy like a son, but didn't expect his return. At that, he remembers the young man saying he wanted to become someone like him. A memory of a child saying he wants to be like his father when he grows up comes to mind. The boss thinks that the boy started saying strange things, and it's not normal at all. He then sits up on the sofa while reflecting on the boy's adoption request. The man stands up and grabs a cardboard box, saying it's been a long time. Inside the box, he finds several mementos, including a photo of the protagonist. He then picks up a crumpled piece of paper that was stored inside. A memory of an accident with a van suddenly flashes in his mind. At a service, photos of the boy's parents are surrounded by white flowers. It's revealed that Wan was disciplined for repeated failures and internal disorder. Additionally, he was accused of neglecting his responsibilities for a long time. His failures harmed not only his team, but also other departments. A personnel notice announces the change in position for manager Kim Moo-won. With a box in his hands, he walks away from the building until a new notice is given. He was transferred to work at the District 1 branch as a manager. His new mission was to protect all areas of Guncheongdong, a dangerous place. The company then asks that he dedicate his efforts to completing the task. At the location, he meets some men who seem to be his new subordinates. With a box in his hands, he enters his new office for the first time. He then looks at the crumpled paper with the notice of his transfer. Angrily, the man crumples the paper with all his strength and throws it on the floor. Sitting on the sofa, he looks completely dejected with his new reality. His eyes gleam with a contained fury as he thinks about his situation. He then sighs and places his hand on the box with his personal belongings. The Gunopa's boss thinks that the boy always knows exactly how to get under his skin. At that moment, someone knocks on the door and calls him for an important conversation. One of his men identifies himself as Song Jae and asks if he can come in. He slowly opens the door and enters the room to speak with his leader. The man says he brought some medicine and finds him sitting on the floor drinking. He then asks what happened and why he was drinking alone. His colleague explains that Yun was expelled after a fight with boys from Daekyung. The boss comments that the situation had already been difficult for him for a good while. Worried, he asks if his colleague is referring to Yun, the boy's sister. The man confirms and says that the boy has always been a very strange child. The two drink together, and one of them says that the young man has become a problem. He also warns that a boy that determined will end up in a dangerous place. Next, the man suggests it would be better to take him in before others do. He then asks if the other gang members think the same way. His colleague explains that Seen already wants to turn the young man into a fighter. Then he questions if the boss thinks the boy was made for much more. He believes that keeping the boy close will be better for his future. With a smile, the leader agrees and says his colleague is logical as always. He then decides he needs to hear directly from the boy what he thinks. The boss asks who is watching the protagonist at that very moment. The man takes out his phone and suggests calling Do Jin to bring him there in a hurry. The leader tells him to hurry up before the boy joins someone else. The colleague then makes the call to his contact and waits for a response from the other side. He asks if the person is at home, and the answer is a very quick yes. On the other end of the line, the man asks him to stop by for a moment. With a cold and determined look, the boy was already waiting outside. A man orders everyone to go home, and his men don't understand why their boss wants to leave so early. The leader says the place isn't bad, and they can celebrate again tomorrow. So anyone who wants to can stay and have another drink. One of the guys complains that the Capital Cartel is a giant syndicate, but since their orders, they have no choice. A subordinate offers to escort him, but the boss refuses, saying he won't get hurt in his own territory. Then he watches his leader walk away and thinks that the main branch is a tough job, thankful for being called over. This is Choi Dae-up, the boss of the District 2 faction, a small gang from the second poorest neighborhood. As he walks, he thinks about how he's been rotting in this hole for years and curses the celebration they were just having. He continues to complain to himself about being demoted to the poorest slum in the entire city. He then remembers being forced to act like a neighborhood thug and gets even more irritated with his situation. The guy then wonders why they suddenly want him at the main branch after ignoring him for so long. Suddenly, a bright light shines in the darkness of the night as he lights a cigarette to try and relax a bit. Now on the rooftop, he looks out at the city and wonders what kind of mess they're trying to get him into now. Looking at the horizon, he thinks it was better when the cops were on their case all the time. With that, he turns his back on the city, looking quite thoughtful about everything that's happening. The man reaches for a pack of cigarettes when he suddenly hears a voice calling him, and he turns around, surprised. One of his men offers him a cigarette and says he drank a lot, but the young man would rather smoke with his boss. The leader then calls him a brat and invites him for one more drink before they call it a night. His colleague seems a bit surprised and calls the boss's name to confirm if he's serious. At that moment, they both look into the distance and see a lone person standing in the middle of a dark alley. The figure then walks toward them and is revealed to be the protagonist, who looks at his watch seriously. The protagonist stares down the gang boss with glowing eyes and calls him by name, making the atmosphere tense. At that, the subordinate angrily asks what the heck the young man is doing there while lighting his leader's cigarette. With a threatening look, the young man then warns that he's going to take care of this intruder who appeared out of nowhere, but his boss stops him and tells him to let it go as he walks toward the mysterious boy. Then the man asks with a scornful tone who the heck he thinks he is to show up like that. He takes a better look at the young man in front of him and realizes he's just a kid who seems harmless. Annoyed, he complains that a brat wandering around is ruining his mood at this time of night. With that, the gang leader tells the boy to disappear before he completely loses his patience. But the young man calmly replies that he's never been one to let things end with just empty words. The three of them stand still in the dark alley, and the tension in the air grows with every passing second. Seeing that he isn't moving, the boss asks if the boy is really not going to leave. The young man then reveals that he actually has something he needs to collect before he can leave. With a serious look, the protagonist says they need to have a little chat before anything else. The gang leader repeats the word, confused, not understanding what a boy could want with him. The young man explains that he heard justification is something very important to him and his group. He comments that unlike the old days, today the big syndicates run everything with their rules. At that, the boy looks at his watch and asks, since when do thugs care about that kind of thing? With a determined look, he states that's why he's there, to give the man a good justification. He reveals that out of the faction's 3 businesses, he hasn't received even 20% of his pay for 3 years. The protagonist then says that it's all based on facts and that this serves as a perfect justification. With a smile, the boss understands it's about money, but says the young man shouldn't be complaining to him about it there. The gang leader advises him to handle this matter directly with the managers responsible for it. Then, the man tells the young man to stop acting like a tough guy for no reason and just get out of there. The young man then replies that if he were going to do that, he wouldn't have gone straight to the boss to solve the problem. The gang leader finds the boy's attitude amusing and comments that he's completely out of his mind. With a look of disdain, the man asks if the young man even knows what that word means. Furious, the boss yells that he's asking for the lives of 300 men, and that this is the weight of justification. With a swift movement, he angrily and forcefully throws away the cigarette he was smoking. The man continues to shout, asking if the young man really thinks a few bucks can buy that. With a threatening glare, the gang leader warns him again that there's no one there to help him. He adds that not just there, but nowhere in the world will he find help, and we see a police emblem. The gang leader comments that since he arrived in the neighborhood, the young man was the first to have the guts to talk back to him. But the man warns that from the second time on, he's serious, and the young man says that drunkards talk a lot. The young man then asks if the boss's point is that his sad story isn't a good enough justification. With a serious look, the boy asks if the trafficking of orphan children would be a good enough justification. A memory from the past shows the protagonist as a child, reading a book in a simple, empty room. Even at such a young age, his face already showed great determination as he studied very hard. Looking out the window, he sees some men abandoning a child and complains about the slum where he lived. We see a gagged man, and the young man thinks that this time it looks like they managed to catch someone. A scared little boy asks who they are, and it's revealed that the child is worth 3,000 on the market. The little boy screams desperately, and the kidnapper threatens him, saying that if he weren't valuable cargo, he would have already hurt him. With that, he orders his partner to gag and tie the child's wrists, but very carefully so as not to damage the product. The other man then grabs the tape and asks sarcastically if this is the first time they've done this. Suddenly, one of the men sees the young protagonist at the door and asks in surprise if he's from District 1. The man is shocked, but without hesitation, the boy lands a powerful kick right in the kidnapper's face. However, the protagonist falls to the ground in pain and complains about the horrible place they were in. Then the man he kicked gets up angrily and says that even the kids in this place don't know their place. Another guy carrying a suitcase tells the boss they're going to make good money and should leave soon. At that, the men decide to leave before they're seen, leaving the young boy behind on the ground. But one of them remembers something important, and they stop before completely leaving the alley. He then asks what they should do with the boy, who is still on the ground, unable to move. Another man approaches and kicks the boy with great force while he lies completely defenseless on the ground. He says he doesn't want to have to deal with a body later, suggesting they should finish the boy off right there. The young boy lies motionless on the ground after the brutal attack he suffered from the kidnappers. Back in the present, the protagonist explains that the guys from District 2 kidnap and sell the children from District 1. He then asks the gang boss if that is a good enough justification for him to finally take action. The leader's eyes widen as he processes the heavy accusation he just heard from the young man. With a serious look, he asks who else knows about this whole child trafficking scheme. A small, confident smile forms on the protagonist's lips as his plan unfolds perfectly. The boss seems to be considering the situation and realizes that if things have come to this, he needs to act. With a sinister smile, the boy says he can't just let him walk away after everything. At that, the subordinate lunges to attack the young man, but he braces himself to counter the man's blow. The two of them rush toward each other at high speed, ready for the fight that's about to begin. With his red eyes glowing, the protagonist readies his fist for a quick and precise attack. Then he lands a devastating blow right in the henchman's stomach, who can't react in time. The subordinate screams in pain, feeling the impact of the powerful punch he just took from the young man. Without wasting any time, the young man prepares a spinning kick with impressive force and great speed, and with a swift move, he hits the man's head, who is knocked out instantly by the attack. The gang leader is completely shocked to see his subordinate defeated so easily. His man is down on the ground, while the protagonist watches the scene with the gang boss still there. The boy then checks his watch and complains that his opponent talked too much for someone so weak. With a serious look, he comments that it was a close call, but fortunately, he managed to handle the situation. At that moment, the gang boss says the young man has every right to bring his justifications. The man's eyes gleam sinisterly, and he seems intrigued by the boy's strength and courage. Suddenly, the leader lunges forward and grabs the protagonist's neck with surprising force. He lifts him into the air without any difficulty, showing that he is much stronger than his subordinate. Even while being attacked, the boy thinks that if it was going to end like this, he shouldn't have dragged it out next time. He then grabs the boss's clothes tightly, preparing for an unexpected counter-attack. With a firm grip, he says he highly doubts they'll meet again after this. The boss is surprised by the boy's reaction and wonders what he's trying to do now. With a sharp gaze, the boy warns that the time has finally come as he holds the gang leader's head firmly. The man's eyes go wide in pure shock as he hears that the legendary Hammerhead would suffer his second defeat right then and there. Staring down the enemy with his glowing red eyes, the protagonist reveals that this exact moment would change everything, and gripping the boss's hair even tighter, he states that the words, "second defeat," had already sealed his fate. Without hesitation, the young man lands a devastating blow and warns that District 1 will be completely wiped off the city's map. The impact of the punch is so strong that the man's body flies backward, unable to offer any resistance to the attack. At that exact moment, heavy footsteps are heard, and a mysterious voice tells the boy to take his hands off the gang leader. From the shadows emerges a muscular man with a threatening look, warning that if he touches his partner again, there will be payback. With an expression of pure fury, the newcomer threatens the young man, saying he'll finish him if the assault continues. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a guy is on the phone asking where the faction members are celebrating the promotion. Upon receiving the location near the barbecue restaurant, he gets up from the couch, confirming he got the message. At that, the man hangs up the phone and grips the device tightly, looking ready to resolve this situation for good. A tattooed young man, who is a former fighter and the boss's right-hand man, wonders if their target really went to the designated location. Thoughtfully, the former fighter murmurs that if things have come to this, he should also start taking some action. But the man on the phone turns his back and simply orders the tattooed young man to stay there and await his next orders. Walking through the hallways, the leader says confidently that this is just District 2, with no reason for so much caution. Obeying the order, the subordinate gives a respectful bow and wishes his boss good luck in handling business. Back in the dark alley, footsteps echo on the wet ground, showing that the tension is only increasing with each passing second. And resuming the confrontation, the intimidating big guy with glowing eyes repeats his threat, saying he had already warned the young man. Even injured and facing this terrifying figure, the protagonist doesn't back down and remembers when he was questioned about his choices. The newcomer continues the young man's thought and says that because of that, he can't give him a complete answer. Annoyed, the muscular man curses at the gang leader and reveals that the young man he hurt is his son. With a smirk, the boy thinks that this was the biggest reason behind his choices and his revenge. Seeing the boss on the ground, the young man's father complains that he's just a child and didn't deserve that treatment. He then stands up imposingly and tells his former colleague to wake up to the reality of the situation. But the boss gets up and retorts that his sentimentality is ridiculous, and that in their line of work, there are no children. With a look of fury, the protector yells that he's the one who's delusional and needs to get real. He then grabs the gang boss's arm and warns that those who talk nonsense are treated like trash. The man fights back with a punch and curses his opponent as the two begin an intense fight in the alley. Dodging the attack, the young man's father prepares for a counter-attack and threatens his enemy again. With a serious and menacing look, he says that this time, instead of his eyes, he'll rip off his ear. The gang boss isn't intimidated and charges forward with clenched fists, ready to continue the fight right there. He lands a powerful punch right in the protector's face, who feels the strong impact of the blow. The leader seems surprised to have landed the hit and watches his opponent's reaction carefully. But the muscular man uses the moment to prepare a quick counter-attack, catching his enemy off guard. Blood drips from the protector's face, but he doesn't seem to care about the pain from the wound he suffered. He returns the blow with the same intensity, and the two trade punches in a brutal and balanced fight. While taking a beating, the boss thinks that it doesn't matter whose fault it was for his demotion in the faction, and with all his strength, he lands a devastating punch on the protector's chest, who feels the powerful blow. The young man's father stumbles back a bit, feeling the pain of the punch, but doesn't give up the fight against the gang leader. The gang boss lands a hard punch on the protector's stomach, who doubles over from the impact of the blow. Even feeling the intense pain, the young man's father endures the attack with an expression of pure determination. Blood gushes from his mouth, but he doesn't let it get to him and stays firm in the fight against the leader. With a quick move, he stops the boss's next punch, and his eyes glow with a red light. And without wasting time, the protector retaliates with a devastating blow right in his former colleague's face. The protagonist watches the intense fight with a surprised expression on his face, still on the ground. The gang leader feels the impact of the punch, and his face gets bruised from the powerful counter-attack. Lying on the ground, the young man keeps his eyes open and bright, watching everything that happens. The protector continues his assault and lands another blow on the boss, who can't defend himself in time. The leader stumbles backward, losing his balance after receiving the series of attacks from his opponent. With a quick spin, the young man's father prepares for another blow while the boss tries to recover. The gang leader angrily curses his opponent and gets ready to continue the intense fight. Then, the protector reveals that his rival doesn't even know the real reason he was demoted in the faction, but he just stared at his boss, a little calmly. In a mocking tone, the muscular man asks if the gang leader is afraid of the situation. On the ground, the protagonist yells in frustration at the whole fight happening right in front of him, but the boss composes himself and says he's waited an entire decade for this moment of confrontation. He continues, saying that even though he was demoted over something stupid, he hasn't lost his strength. An image of a hammerhead shark appears, and he declares that the hammerhead still has his bite. With a determined look, the gang leader prepares to show that he's still a dangerous fighter. The fight continues, and the protector lands a devastating punch that sends the gang boss straight to the ground. With his eyes glowing red, the boy's father shows he's not messing around and will see this through to the end. The protagonist watches the whole scene with an expression of awe and admiration for his protector's strength. Lying on the ground, the gang leader looks up at the sky with a bruised face, completely defeated in the fight. The scene is one of destruction, with both opponents on the ground and the muscular man standing as the sole victor. Victorious, the young man's father stares down at his former colleague on the ground with an imposing and very cold posture. He then approaches and grabs the boss by the collar, reminding him that he had already warned him about the consequences. Fulfilling his promise, the protector prepares to bite his rival's ear brutally and without hesitation. The gang leader screams in pain and agony, feeling the terrible attack from his merciless opponent. Blood runs down his face, and he writhes on the ground after suffering a very serious injury. The protagonist reflects that the result is always the same, and even without knowing the details, Kim Mo-won always wins. With a slight smile, he thinks that in the world, there are those who destroy, and those who are destroyed. That's the law. And even the feared hammerhead, who was always the predator, ended up becoming the prey in the end. Looking at his protector, he understands that this man knows exactly what kind of message he needs to send. The boy's father not only keeps his word, but he makes sure that everyone remembers it well. At that moment, the young man realizes that it didn't matter how the fight went down, because the ending was already decided. With a bruised face, Kim Mo-won shows that this is his way of settling things once and for all. The protagonist thinks that this man is truly someone worthy of being at the absolute top of power. With this certainty in his heart, the young man decides that alongside this man, he can go to the very end of his journey. The protector then gets the boy's attention and tells him to stop spacing out and grab onto him. The protector helps him up and asks why the young man is looking at him like that. The young man replies that he was just noticing the blood on his savior's mouth after the fight. The man then wipes his face and asks if it's better, but the boy says it's no use because it's blood. At that, the older man decides it's time to go, but the young man asks him to wait just a second. So the man says he'll go on ahead, and that the young man can catch up when he's done with what he needs to do. The boy kneels next to the fallen body, and we see that his hand is badly injured from the confrontation. With a serious look, he picks up a piece of what was left of the gang boss from the ground. Elsewhere, a voice asks if the protagonist really went there to collect his wages. We see the protector sitting on a couch, and he questions if all that trouble was just for a justification. With a sigh, he comments that kids these days are very bold and don't fear danger. He runs a hand through his hair and wonders if the boy is a genius or an idiot for getting involved in this. Thoughtfully, he concludes that no matter how he looks at the situation, the best thing to do is to stay away from the young man. But the young man interrupts him and says there's no need to overthink what happened there. He explains simply that he just made a promise and kept it, and that's all that matters. Then the protector finds it funny that he mentions that, and comments on the rumors about the gang boss. He reveals that their rival was called back to the main branch, and because of that, their deal was off. The man advises the young man to give up and go back to school, assuring him that some school would accept him. But the boy immediately refuses the offer and asks why the heck he would do something like that now. With a quick movement, he puts his hand in his pocket and says he has something to give to the older man. He then opens his hand and reveals proof of leadership of the District 2 faction, as they had agreed. With a confident smile, the young man says that an ear is still part of the head, so technically he kept his promise. He explains that just as the ear is part of his head now, he is also part of the District 1 faction. The man leans forward and laughs at the young man's audacity, calling him a crazy, sassy punk. With a serious expression, he asks what exactly the young man wants and why he went so far for this. The protector looks at him and questions his reason for going to such lengths just to get involved in this world. He then asks why, of all things, the boy chose to be a gangster, and why his son of all people. The young man replies that he has two major goals he intends to achieve from this point in his life. His first goal is to drag all the rotten scoundrels down with all the strength he has. With a look of pure vengeance, he swears he will take them to a place even lower than where he is now. He continues to explain that on the way to this goal, whether in the process or the final result, one thing is certain. The young man looks at his father and promises that he will put him at the absolute top of that world, no matter what. With a smile, he reveals that this is his second and most important goal of all. Meanwhile, the tattooed subordinate listens to the entire conversation, hidden behind the door, unnoticed. Suddenly, the young protagonist approaches the door, and the henchman is surprised by his presence. The tattooed man turns and tells the boy to follow him, seeming to have a plan in mind for that moment. The two of them walk through the dark night toward an unknown place, and the atmosphere between them is tense. The young man asks if they are going to the same place as before, and the older man doesn't answer. They arrive at a convenience store and stop in front of the establishment, illuminated by the night. The tattooed subordinate then offers a blue popsicle to the young man, who is a bit confused by the gesture. The protagonist asks the reason for this sudden change of heart, and the henchman questions him back. At that, the henchman hands the blue popsicle to the young man, saying that the choices in his life were never made suddenly. The young man takes a bite of the sweet treat and comments that no matter how hard he tried to fly, he always ended up falling back into the pit. Meanwhile, we see the serious face of the boy's father, looking quite worried about the direction things are taking. The older man had warned that unless there was a good reason, his son should stay in the light and use his fists only in the ring. Back in the alley, the tattooed man praises the protagonist, stating that he truly has a natural talent for fighting. With the popsicle in his mouth, the boy listens as the henchman says that although he has lost his way in life, the young man can still have a bright future. Next, we see the young man's father smiling and asking him to forget this crazy idea, leaving the syndicate business to the adults. But with a sharp and angry look, the protagonist simply replies that it's now too late to turn back. He continues his line of reasoning, stating that if he doesn't take charge of the situation, absolutely nothing will change. At that, the boy recalls his father's warning, saying he didn't teach him how to fight just so he could get into street brawls. The young man takes a deep breath, looking a bit frustrated, and agrees, saying he knows very well everything he was taught. Then the subordinate holds his own sweet treat and questions if what he and the boss are trying to do isn't just another act of revenge. Without hesitation, the young man takes another cold bite and agrees, saying that if that's the case, he needs to do his part too. The big tattooed man turns his back and stares into the dark night, seeming to reflect on the boy's terrifying determination. With a smirk, the protagonist holds the wooden stick and reinforces that his ultimate goal is indeed revenge. The two continue talking on the lit street, and the young man warns that the highest authority of all has already given the order for him to act. With a tone of great respect, he reveals that this ultimate authority is none other than Kim Muon, who is his own father. Far away, we see someone's hands crumpling the empty wrapper of a sweet treat with great force, showing some anxiety. Then, the person throws the paper ball directly into the trash, showing that the break time was over. A bearded man relaxes on the sofa, smoking calmly, when the door opens and he greets the tattooed henchman named Dongseun. The boss asks his subordinate if the young Doyen got home safely, and he bows respectfully. The tattooed man replies yes, and that he personally accompanied him to ensure everything was fine between them. With a tired look, the leader comments that things with that boy ended up taking an unexpected turn. At that, the henchman respectfully asks why his boss agreed to the young protagonist's crazy plan. The older man then begins to explain that even if he hadn't taken him in as a son, nothing would change. He states that the boy would have gone after the capital cartel anyway, and his subordinate is shocked by the revelation. With a wave of his hand, the leader continues his reasoning and says that besides all that, there was another important reason. A memory of the piece the young man brought as proof of his promise comes up in their conversation. He explains that the young man blackmailed him by fulfilling his part of the deal and bringing what was asked, leaving him no choice. With a tired sigh, the boss concludes the explanation, saying that's exactly how it all happened. The tattooed subordinate then confirms that he understands the whole situation and the reason behind his leader's decision. He then asks about the matter of the adopted son and how they should handle this delicate issue. The boss seems a bit annoyed by the question and remains silent for a moment, thinking about the answer. With that, the henchman continues and asks how this new situation would affect the plans they had already made. Clenching his fist tightly, the leader states with conviction that absolutely nothing will change in their original plan. With his eyes glowing, he adds that since they've already attacked Choi Day-up, they need to speed things up. Meanwhile, we see the protagonist climbing a staircase alone at night, and he lets out a tired sigh. With a small smile, he thinks of his father and comments that the man is truly quite a character. A memory of the boss hearing the young man's goal to put his father at the absolute top of everything comes to mind. With a determined look, the protagonist reinforces in his thoughts that this is his second and greatest goal of all. The leader then angrily questions if the young man thinks he can just use him to do his dirty work. But the young man replies with a calm smile that of course not, and shows that he has other plans. At that, the older man is in shock when the boy declares that from that day on, he will be his father. With a serious look, the protagonist even asks if he happens to be wrong in his statement. The man sighs and calls the boy a crazy punk, saying that's not something you decide so easily. He explains that a son is everything in a father's life, and no matter what you do for them, it's never enough. At that, the boss continues and says he's sure the young man's real parents felt the same way about him. With a worried look, the man asks if the young man is sure he's okay with this decision. The boy replies that's exactly why, and that from now on, he will become Kim Do-yeon. He reveals that it was because of him that his father went after his rival after staying away for 10 years. Speechless, the gang leader can only stammer and is at a loss for what to say to the young man. But he composes himself and says that's enough talk, accepting the situation once and for all. The two then stand facing each other, and a silence falls over the room for a moment. Then the man decides that if that's how it's going to be, so be it, and places a hand on the young man's head with a smile. In his thoughts, the boy admits that he expected him to reject his desire to be a gangster, and he adds, thinking that he couldn't have said anything if his adoptive father had refused the idea. Later, outside the house, the young man wonders how he's going to tell a certain person all of this. Suddenly, a girl appears out of nowhere and aggressively asks what he needs to tell. The protagonist is startled by her sudden appearance and stammers Ian's name awkwardly. She asks if it's about the adoption request or the fight with the thug from District 2, leaving him speechless. Ian then asks with a serious look if the young man really got everything he wanted out of it. The young woman continues to stare at him and waits for an honest answer about the outcome of the fight. The protagonist looks a bit awkward and replies yes, but his expression doesn't seem so confident. She says that's good, and that it would be terrible if his first plan went wrong right at the beginning. With that, the young woman turns and tells the young man to come inside so they can eat something together. Do-yeon is surprised, and the girl comments that he probably hadn't even had dinner yet that night. The young man thanks her somewhat awkwardly as he watches her walk away and go back inside the house. Next, we see the simple house where they live together in this neighborhood far from the city center. Already inside, everyone is gathered, and the atmosphere in the room seems quite serious and a bit tense. One of the men complains that having the new guy sitting there with them is very strange and uncomfortable. But the group's leader just replies that there's nothing to be done and that everyone needs to get used to it. Then the boss looks at his adopted son and asks if he managed to sort everything out that he needed to. The young man explains that sorting things out just meant talking to Ian, and she already knew everything. With that, the older man tells the boy to finally explain his plan and the reason he wants to join. Do-yeon starts talking about the fastest method with the highest chance of success that he thought of. The young man then reveals a plan so bold that his words are censored for their aggressiveness. The young man's father comments that he already imagined the kind of thing his heir was planning to do, but the leader rejects the idea on the spot and says that plan is completely out of the question. He explains that for a large operation, the most important thing of all is the group's safety, With a serious look, the boss warns that he will only approve if the plan ensures everyone gets out alive. The boss says there's no rush and that they will stick to the original plan, clearing out the districts one by one. One of his men nods in agreement and says he perfectly understood his leader's order. Suddenly, the door is kicked open, and everyone stands up on alert as a voice asks if this is the place. Members of the District 2 faction appear at the door, confirming that this is the office they were looking for. The group of invaders then faces the protagonist's team, who are gathered inside the small room. Without a second thought, one of Moan's men, named Taeju, runs at high speed to attack the intruders. With his teeth clenched in anger, the fighter yells at the invaders as he prepares for the first attack. The men from the other faction are completely surprised and scared by the violent and unexpected reaction. He then lands a devastating punch on one of the henchmen, who has no time to defend against the blow. The impact is so strong that the man flies backward, knocking over his companions in the process. With his eyes glowing red, the fighter already readies his fist for the next attack without hesitation. He lands another powerful blow on one of the invaders who tries to protect himself but fails in time. And with a swift movement, the man from Faction 1 lands a precise kick to his opponent's face. At that, the entire team joins the fray and starts attacking the rival faction members with everything they've got. We see a close-up of Taeju's fist landing squarely on one of the enemy's faces with great force. With a spinning motion, his foot hits another one of the henchmen, who was trying to approach him from behind. He continues the assault and lands a brutal blow on another guy's head, who is stunned by the hit. The man falls to the ground, defeated, while the protagonist watches the fight from a distance in silence. Even after taking down several of them, the fighter still looks furious and ready to continue the brawl. One of the invaders has a look of pure terror on his face as he sees the strength of his opponent. But Taeju shows no mercy and lands a devastating punch right in the scared henchman's face. The man is thrown to the ground by the impact of the blow, and the fight seems to be over for him. Meanwhile, the boss watches the whole commotion with a calm and controlled expression on his face. Behind one of the team members, the young Doyen also watches everything with a surprised look. Lying on the ground, one of the men begs the fighter to wait and not continue the brutal attack. With a dark look, the boy's adoptive father then orders Taeju to stop, as it's been enough. The fighter is on top of the fallen man and prepares to deliver the final blow and finish him for good. But he stops and looks at his boss, obeying the order immediately, and gets off the enemy. With the fight over, one of the members comments that those guys were nothing special in the end. The same man then wonders why the heck the District 2 faction decided to attack them. The man on the ground reveals that they also saw everything that happened to their boss. He continues, saying that everyone saw Boss Choi Dae-op get defeated, and the young man's father stares at him. At that, one of the members asks if they are there to get revenge for their former leader's defeat. But the henchman desperately denies it and says that's not at all as he raises his hands. He bows in a gesture of supplication and begs them to accept him into the faction once and for all. The man explains that they are just a small branch, and they surrender unconditionally to the new power. One of the men repeats the invader's words, looking quite confused by the total surrender. With a small smile, the protagonist reveals that the first step of the plan is to dominate the districts. The young man states that District 2 will fall into their laps without them having to lift a single finger. One of the members then questions if the great capital Cartel will simply hand over the district. The young man calmly replies no, and that they would never do something like that so easily. The man then asks why they gave up, and we see the confident look of the young strategist. He explains that the districts are a land that nobody wants and that they have no economic value. The capital Cartel only sent Choi Dae-op there to keep the Huxiong gang in check. At that point, the capital Cartel called him back, and with him gone, no one else has a reason to care. This leaves the remnants of the District 2 faction with only one choice to make. They can either bow their heads and surrender, or be completely wiped out from the city. That's why they needed to attack Choi Dae-up and give the others a justification to surrender. The young man then asks them to think about what happens when men see their leader get crushed. Those who witness their boss's absolute authority first and become completely terrified. With a confident smile, the young man asserts that the District 2 faction will kneel before them. Then, they will just absorb the remaining members and take over District 2 completely. If his prediction is correct, his first job as a member has already been completed without a single casualty. The man is shocked by the young man's mind and wonders what the heck goes on inside his head. At that moment, the protagonist comments that this was the perfect time for everything to happen. The gang leader stares at his adopted son, completely shocked by the situation he created. In his thoughts, the older man can hardly believe how this whole situation unfolded. The men bow again and beg to be allowed to live, promising to do whatever they're told. The young man's father puts a hand on his head and says that this is all simply unbelievable. One of the men then turns to the boss and asks what the final decision will be on the matter. The boss says they came crawling and asks what else they could do in this situation. So he decides he will accept them into the faction, but with one important condition for all of them. He warns that for now, they will stay in District 2, and if their plans are bad, the partnership is over. The men thank him and bow, promising they won't disappoint the new leader who has taken them in. The leader then appoints the guy as the new chief and says he will report to Sung Jae from now on. The new person in charge shouts that he understands and swears they won't be a burden to the new faction. With a tired sigh, the young man's father gestures with his hand and tells them all to get out. The new leader and his men say their goodbyes and begin to leave the room, still helping the injured. With that, the door closes and the room falls silent again. After all the commotion, the original team is now alone in the room, and the atmosphere seems a bit more relaxed among them. The leader turns to one of his men and warns him that he'll have a tough time with the new members, but the young man replies that it's nothing and that he'll keep an eye on them to make sure they don't cause any trouble. With his back to everyone, the protagonist thinks that it seems like everything went exactly as he planned. With a smile, the young man states that everything turned out perfectly and that he won't accept any more complaints. The boy's adoptive father just stares at him with an expression of someone who can't believe it. Another team member also looks at the young man with a surprised face at what he just heard. But Taeju, who had been quiet, gives a thumbs up, seemingly approving of the attitude. We also see another member who just watches the scene with a very thoughtful look. The tattooed man then turns to the young man and tells him to just admit it was a good plan. The boy says he can read the room and that he's leaving now because he needs to prepare for the next step. From the doorway, he looks back one last time and says he has things to prepare for the future. Then the young man leaves the room and the door closes again, leaving the team behind to discuss. Meanwhile, elsewhere, we see Choi Dae-up walking down a hallway looking anything but friendly. He lets out a sigh of frustration and seems to be very annoyed with everything that has happened. The man curses under his breath as he continues down the brightly lit hallway of the building. His expression is one of pure anger, and he seems to be planning some kind of revenge against everyone. He then stops in front of a door and knocks hard, calling for the director inside. In a serious tone, he announces himself and says he's there to report his return to the main branch. A voice from inside says he's been through a lot, and the man enters the boss's luxurious office. With his head bowed, he approaches, and the director asks what important report he has brought. He starts by saying the report is about the districts and the situation happening over there. With a look of pure rage, he reveals that it seems Kim Mo-won is finally making his move. Meanwhile, the young Doyen leaves the room and says he's going now because he needs to prepare for the future. Outside, he lets out a tired sigh after all the chaos that just happened. With a serious look, the young man thinks to himself that it was a very close call and almost everything went wrong. He then begins to climb the building's stairs in silence, seeming to be going somewhere alone. Suddenly, some men from the faction that surrendered stop him on his way and tell him to wait. One of them complains and angrily asks what the heck the boy wants with them now that it's all over. But the protagonist calmly replies that he hasn't had the chance to say everything on his mind yet. One of the guys gets angry and asks where he got the nerve to talk to them like that. With a smirk, the young man comments that they're talking like real street thugs. The man continues to shout that his attitude is annoying and that he's not even an official member of the faction. Unfazed, the protagonist just challenges him and tells him to do something about it if he has the guts. He then asks with a serious look if they aren't off their guard this time like they were before. The henchman gets really mad and yells that kids these days have lost all respect as he lunges to attack. But the young man dodges the punch with great ease, moving to the side without any effort. And without wasting time, he lands a devastating counter attack right on the enemy's face, who doesn't react. The man falls to the ground knocked out, and his companions are in shock, wondering who this kid is. The young man then cracks his knuckles and asks if they cleaned house or if they forgot about him. With a sharp gaze, he finally asks if they don't remember who he really is. One of the henchmen stares at the young man and comments that his face looks a bit familiar. A memory of the child kidnapping comes back, and the man remembers the boy from District 1. At that, he asks in shock if the young man is the same kid who always messed up their plans. With a smirk, the protagonist confirms it, saying it looks like he finally remembered. The henchman becomes furious and yells that the young man has no idea what he went through to get into the faction. With a clenched fist, he says that's why the young man knows things he shouldn't know. He then runs toward the boy, shouting that because of that, he can't be left alive. With an expression of pure rage, the man repeats the threat, saying the young man can't leave there. But the protagonist dodges the attack and prepares for a quick and precise counter-attack. And with a precise movement, he lands a powerful punch right on his opponent's face. The henchman feels the impact of the blow, and his face contorts in pain from the force of the attack. Without giving him time to react, the young man lands another powerful blow on the man's head. Lying on the ground, the protagonist warns that actually, he's the one who can't be left alive. The young man then prepares to deliver the final blow and end the fight once and for all. And with a strong stomp, he finishes his opponent, saying that he's the one who can't be left alive. One of the other men in the group is completely shocked and scared by the scene he just witnessed. The young man then explains that this guy was the only one who acted like a thug before Dayop arrived. He turns to the others and says he doesn't recognize any of them and has nothing against them. One of the men explains that the guy on the ground did the chief's dirty work and that the past doesn't matter. But the young man stares at him and asks if with that attitude they are trying to defy Muwan's orders. With a serious look, the young man warns them not to underestimate Faction 1 and to take care of the rotten branches. He then guarantees that there will be no more street thugs in his new faction from now on. The man agrees, scared, and promises he will take responsibility and clean up the whole mess. But the young man grabs him by the collar and says that although it's good to have someone to talk to, he doesn't trust thugs. With a smile, the protagonist tells the man to stay sharp and not to mess up with the new orders. He then turns and walks away, leaving the others behind to take care of their comrades. One of the henchmen comments that the District 1 faction also has some pretty violent guys in their group. The other agrees and tells him to clean everything up before someone else shows up and sees the scene. They take care of the injured man and decide they need to cut ties with anyone connected to Dayop. Their leader thinks that the young man knows about his former boss's dirty secrets, and that maybe he set everything up. He continues to think and suspects that the young man might actually be planning something even bigger. Meanwhile, Doyen reflects that the orphan kidnappers were just thugs trying to get into the faction. He reveals that one of the guys he faced was there 10 years ago and needed to be warned about something. With that in mind, he already thinks about the next step, which is to take over District 3 to ensure their safety. The young man arrives home and thinks that his father and the others must be thinking of the same strategy. Suddenly, he hears a strange noise coming from outside and stops before entering the house. On the ground, he sees his old school uniform with his old name all crossed out and thrown away. A new guy with a bruised nose appears and calls him a beggar, saying it was hard to find him. The protagonist just stares at the newcomer with a serious and very cold look without saying a word. It's revealed that this is Wong Sung-yak, the son of a director from the powerful capital Cartel. The director's son approaches and asks if the young man was the one responsible for taking down Choi Dae-up. The two then stare at each other in silence, and the tense atmosphere grows with every passing second. The newcomer complains that because of the protagonist, his days of living the good life are over for good. With a look of contempt, he comments that the young man's eyes are extremely annoying to him. At that, he threatens him, saying he's going to ruin every little thing Doyen tries to do from now on. He warns the boy to expect attacks wherever the cartel operates, and that he will personally destroy him. But the protagonist just shrugs and turns his back, not giving a darn about the threats. The young man seems completely calm and doesn't even care about what he just heard from the enemy. Meanwhile, the old school uniform remains on the ground, all torn and covered in dust. With a worried look, the young man wonders if the young Ian also saw that scene. He then lets out a sigh and seems to feel a bit of pain because of the whole situation. Without saying another word, the protagonist opens the gate to his house to finally go inside. And with that, he enters the property and leaves the director's son behind, still standing on the street. Elsewhere, the boy's adoptive father is talking to his man, and he thinks they went too far. The subordinate points to the jar with the remains of the former chief and says he was drunk, but Muwan explains that even though demoted, Dae-up was strong, and the cartel sent him as a precaution. He continues, saying that with Doyen exposed, there was no other way to direct the anger toward himself. The chief reveals that the brat who threatened him is a director's son, and that he will take care of it. With a bottle in hand, he states that he will take responsibility for both situations. His man then asks if he wants the jar to be sent to the former chief in his name. With his eyes glowing, the leader agrees and says they need to do it to provoke the giant.